everybody on Who's Got an Oil for That. This is Brian McKenna. I'm here with my good friend Adam Nevins, who is also a Wise House Oils member. And we're going to be talking today about ServLife International and about the project that they're working on in Kathmandu, Nepal. So Adam, maybe to start, give us a little bit of background about ServLife and what ServLife does.
Yeah. So Brian, thanks for having me. ServLife has been around for about 28 years now. And it started with a college student in Texas, went on a missions trip to India, and there he met a young Indian pastor in his mid-30s. And the two of them really made a connection, and this young Indian pastor, Albert, challenged this young college student, hey, why don't you go home and raise money and send the money to India, and we'll start a ministry together, and we'll train pastors to start churches, we'll care for children and start an orphanage. And so that's literally what ended up happening. This college student, Joel, went back to Texas. His father was a prominent Baptist pastor and had a lot of connections. And so through that, they were able to do some fundraising and really started this ministry focused on equipping pastors to start churches and then caring for children, both through orphanages and through education. And then it's grown beyond that. The third program that got launched was microfinance. And so many of these families that could not afford to send their kids to school, we did microfinance to help them be able to provide for their own family. And so you're talking about a small business loan for goats or pigs or ginger farming. And normally they pay those back in a year to 2 years. And in the first year, they normally see a 250% increase in their annual income, which is incredible. So it's been operating in India since the very beginning, and then we started in Nepal in the late 2000s, or early 2000s. And then I became a volunteer with the organization in 2003. I was a worship pastor at my church. I was on the missions team, and that Indian pastor, Albert, came to the U.S. and challenged me directly when I met him to come to India and see the work that God was doing there. And so the next year I was on a flight and got to see the work that they were doing, and then began doing volunteer trips with them and eventually joined the staff in 2012.
And so tell me a little bit more about the Kathmandu Children's Home and some of the stories of the people involved there.
Yeah. So we have two small orphanages in Kathmandu, and they were started by Udaya and Bhakti. And Udaya grew up in far western Nepal, kind of farming area and in the middle of the jungle. And his father became deathly ill. And they took him from doctor to doctor, and they just couldn't help him. They went to witch doctor after witch doctor, and they could not help him. And they heard about this Christian hospital that was a long ways away, but they figured, we've tried everything locally, let's try this other place. So they put him on a cot, and Udaya and his brother walk their dad to this hospital. And it's like 2 days traveling, they spend the night in the jungle. So they eventually make it to this hospital, and the doctor looks at him, and the doctor says, you don't have any medical issues, you got a spiritual issue. And you need to pray to Jesus to save you, and he will save you. And so, like, okay. That night, Udaya's father had this dream that Jesus came to him. And he woke up the next morning and he prayed, Jesus, would you save me? And 2 hours later, he got up out of his bed, he walked over to the office, which he'd not been able to stand up for months and months, walked over to the doctor's office and said, I prayed to Jesus, and I think he's healing me. And the doctor was almost shocked, even though he was the one that prescribed, this miraculous prayer. But this is what happened. So he recovered, and he was just fine, and he was able to walk himself back to the village. And so when Udaya's father shared this story with the family, they all became Christian, and they prayed to Jesus that he would save them. And so Udaya's whole family became a Christian, but then the entire village turned against them. Udaya's entire extended family turned against them. And they basically got kicked out of the village, and they had to start all over again. And so Udaya grew up and really felt like he wanted to get into education, ended up becoming a vice principal at a school, and moved to Kathmandu and got married to his wife Bhakti. And they felt like God was telling them, you need to start an orphanage. Well, meanwhile, he's also like doing street preaching, and so he'll just go out to the street corner and he'll be, preaching the gospel of Jesus and the hope and salvation that comes from Christ. And he got arrested because it's illegal to do that in Nepal. So he got arrested, thrown in jail. When he came out of jail, he didn't have a job anymore because it had gone to someone else. And so he was praying that God would give him a job, and God said, you need to start an orphanage. And he said, well, that's great, but I got no money, I got no job, I don't know how that would happen. Well, the next day, this gentleman comes to his door and he said, hey, I heard you were starting an orphanage. I've got these 2 little kids that don't have anyone. Would you take them in?
And he already had 2 kids of his own at this point, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
2 more with no job.
Yeah. So Udaya and Bhakti had a small boy and daughter of their own. And so then these 2 girls came, and they felt like they had to say yes. Yes, we have to say yes to these 2 little kids. So they take them in, and he wants to get them enrolled in school, but there's basic school fees that you have to pay, really even with the public schools in Nepal. So Udaya goes to meet with the principal, and the principal doesn't want to meet with him, and she's like, no, I'm busy today. And he sat down in the office and said, I'm not going anywhere until you meet with me. And he sat there all day long, and at 6 o'clock at night, she was like, fine, I'll meet with you. And so he meets with her, and he says, I've got these little kids that they need to go to school, but we don't have any money. And I need you to take them in with, no payment, no tuition or anything. And she said, no, we don't do that. And he said, yes, you have to take them in. And he argues with her for an hour and wears her out. And she's finally like, okay, fine, we'll take these kids in. And since then, they've grown this ministry from 2 kids to over 300 children all throughout Nepal. And so they're running 3 different orphanages, 2 in Kathmandu and 1 in West Nepal, and then providing education for 300 kids in addition to that. So the homes that are in Kathmandu, we are renting those facilities. And we've actually had landlords kick us out of facilities before because they get pressure from Hindu fundamentalists saying, hey, you don't want anything to do with Christians, you shouldn't rent to Christians. And so they'll kick us out. And one of our landlords has just told us, hey, at the end of next year, I want you out of the house. I don't want you here anymore. And so there's some urgency for us to be able to provide a home for these kids.
The urgent situation facing the ServLife Children's Home in Kathmandu, Nepal is no small thing. But as we often say in Wise House Oils, everything is figure-outable. So check out our next episode of Chai with Adam and Brian to find out how the plan is unfolding for God to provide a forever home for Udaya and Bhakti and all their children in the Kathmandu Children's Home.